All right, good morning. Mic check, everybody good? Yeah? Back row, you hear me okay? Awesome, I'm seeing some smiles back there. I'm really excited to share this presentation, and I want to thank Tableau for this opportunity. I'm getting to share a connection between the how and the why with Tableau. This is a really important why for me. This is something I really believe in, this lowering the total cost of healthcare and improving the quality we deliver to patients, and then thinking about how our design methods within Tableau can accomplish those goals. A little bit of background about myself before we kick this off too much. I'm the creative director of analytics at Front Health and Midwest Health Collaborative. My role is to design products that align with our strategic consulting initiatives to help hospitals accomplish those goals I mentioned before of lowering the total cost of care and improving patient quality. And Tableau is the enterprise platform that we use to develop those products. Prior to coming to Midwest Health Collaborative and Front Health, I managed a practice of roughly 30 data visualization consultants working across industries. But I believed in this mission, I believed in this cause, and so I decided to focus in healthcare. Today, quick agenda. I want to introduce MHC and Front Health. We're not a name that you all may recognize yet, but you will once you're done with this presentation. I want to talk about how we deliver analytics with Tableau and a little bit about the embedded analytics license model that we're working with. I want to talk about how we design our products, and then I want to give you a little glimpse of the use cases and how our products are helping accomplish those. And then I want to tell you what the results are and where we're going to go next, because we've got a really exciting agenda. So a little bit about us. As a bit of context, right, healthcare is moving away from fee-for-service, and we're moving into this value-based world. And if you have questions about that afterwards and what that means, feel free to come up and talk to me. But starting out as a grounding point, right, in a value-based world, individual health systems can have some common struggles that we saw. They can lack this sufficient network adequacy so they can entertain these meaningful employer contracts. They often don't have the scale that's going to get the attention of the payers, and so that balance of negotiating power can be on the wrong side. The tools in population health in the value-based world can be really cost prohibitive for individual systems to take on. There is a limited ability to share what's working and what's not working across health systems and thinking about the competition there. The attributed membership, especially thinking about it from a statistical distribution standpoint, that membership can be low, which means you can have a higher chance of getting a really risky population or a really safe population, and so it's hard to measure and plan for that. And then finally, we're starting to see other systems collaborate. And so that leads to how Midwest Health Collaborative was born. We are a consortia of 5 hospitals in Ohio, the Cleveland Clinic, ProMedica, Altman, Ohio Health, and Premier Health. We have places all over Ohio in the health systems and primary care areas. Front Health, which is what you're going to hear me talk about a lot today, that's where I fit within Midwest Health Collaborative. Front Health was born out of MHC. That's the umbrella under where the data and analytics and consulting plays. And Front Health was born both to provide these systems to our current members, but also to external clients as well, and to help carry this mission to other health systems. A little bit more about that. The top half you can kind of think as Midwest Health Collaborative overall, and then the bottom half being Front Health. So the top half is where we have that network and our go-to-market strategies. But the bottom half, on the right-hand side, I'll start with first, the clinical part, where we are helping hospitals develop new initiatives, new clinical initiatives that are going to help deliver quality, but also reduce that cost. And then on the left-hand side, the data and analytics, really that spot where I play. So making sure we're delivering the right resources to the right people at the right time for decision-making, and then also educating them on what are the best practices. How do you design your dashboards? When do you use predictive modeling? When do you just stick with traditional business intelligence? All of those are the umbrella of services that we're offering to our members and our clients. Time to talk about the embedded analytics model within Tableau and the license. A little bit of a before picture, right? Does this look complicated and confusing to anyone out there? Yes, right? Does this look like a familiar description of a business model that you may or may not work in and want to admit? Yeah. So we have 2 data sources, clinical and claims data, and we have consultants that access those data sources manually. They then get them into, I only have one Excel file per consultant, but I assure you it's not only one Excel file, there's a lot of them. There are a lot of pivot charts happening simultaneously. We do some calculations, and then we plug those into PowerPoint. Again, manual, manual, manual. And then we send those results off to our member systems. We get this really tangled web, almost like an interference diagram, this tangled web of deliverables. Now, I want to say I am by no means trying to say that our services that we provide, the insights that we provide, even in this model, aren't valuable or aren't helpful. What I am saying is that the delivery method is not streamlined for the users. And it's not streamlined for us either. Having to do this can be convoluted. Here's what it looks like with the embedded license model. Super simple, right? We have a server that takes these two sources, combines them together. We run our ETL and predictive modeling in that server, and then boom, there's Tableau Server. We have integrated Tableau Server with our security portal. We have chosen Okta for that, so it provides multi-factor authentication. I want to show you a little bit about what this looks like for the end user experience. You're going to hear me talk about users all day long. I'm kind of like Tron. I fight for the users. Anybody get that reference? Yeah? Maybe not the younger ones. I love that movie. All right. So here we are. You want to go to our dashboards. This is what you're going to see. You're going to go to this website and log in. If you are not in your home office, we've whitelisted IP addresses. If you're not in your home office, you can send a push notification to your phone. That's that multi-factor authentication. And that's going to take you to this portal. All of our different products and services fit within this portal and go to our clients. They would find Tableau there. Alternatively, you're already in your browser. You're checking your email. You're looking at different things. There is a browser extension. You click on that. You find that Tableau button. Boom, you are in. This is one of our demo screenshots. And it looks like the normal Tableau server. It's just working through Okta and that embedded model, which allows us to very cost-effectively serve our clients with analytics. Now's the part that I absolutely love as someone that's worried about creativity and design. How do we build those dashboards that are right for the users and enable those decisions? First, a question. Have you ever diligently gathered and built to stakeholder requirements only to end up with low user adoption? Seen it over and over and over again, right? In my last role as a consultant, one of our biggest services we offered was called report consolidation. We'd walk into a business and they'd say we have 10, 20, 30, 40, a few hundred, a few thousand reports that are sitting out there, and we know that probably 95% of them aren't being used. And I would compare this with an analogy that fits in healthcare. Imagine if you went to the doctor, and the doctor didn't ask, what are your symptoms? What's your life like? What are you going through? The doctor just said, what prescription do you want? I have no idea. Right? I don't know what to take. I don't know what to ask for. I'm not a doctor. That would be a completely suboptimal experience for me. That would also be dangerous. And I think that traditional methods set us up for this. So let's look at something that Henry Ford may or may not have said. It's often misattributed to him. But if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Now, backing up a little bit, I am by no means saying that we should not talk to the end users. In fact, I'm going to push that we should. Stakeholders that are representing the users are almost always the wrong people to talk to. You want to talk to the people that are actually going to be making the decisions. But asking them what they want, if you ask, what data do you want to see, right? They're often just going to describe the Excel spreadsheet that they're currently using. So then when you build something, it's going to look like an Excel spreadsheet that they're currently using. Why would they change their process to use something different when you just built the same thing? They just have to go do something different to access it. Build something more powerful. Build something that's solving a new pain point. There are a lot of problems that end up with low user adoption. And we've seen this a lot in the value-based space. The first is a failure to combine all the data that is necessary for decision making. Imagine if you got into an Uber or a Lyft and they said, I can take you 1 block, but your destination is 10 blocks away. Great. I have to go back to my old process of walking to get there. And often our analytics do that. We only get them 1 block, and they have to get back out and then walk the rest of the way. Well, 1 block's not that far of a walk. Why would I even try getting an Uber or Lyft in the first place? They often are disparate dashboards, and there's no cohesive navigation. Where do I go for what question and what answer? How do I get from one dashboard to the next? Why would I use this dashboard over that dashboard? They often don't fit user workflows. One of my biggest frustrations is when you have a user that's making a decision, and the analytics aren't there when they're making that decision. They have to stop their process and go do something else to get the information they need to go back that original thing and make a decision. You hear this from doctors all the time, that they're already in a workflow, and if that dashboard or your analytics aren't part of it, then I have to stop, and it's increasing that amount of time I have to take away from visiting my patients. And the last one is hindering analytics with clunky interfaces and user-agnostic application of visualization best practices. We hear a lot about use this chart or use that chart. Make sure you format this chart this way and that chart that way. But if you've learned anything from a lot of the brilliant speakers here at this conference, it's that there are nuanced use cases where we should break those rules, and that these are really guidelines. And if you blindly apply these best practices without thinking about who your users actually are, you're often going to miss. We found that over and over again. There is a researcher at Ohio State that has found that there are groups of people that interpret pie charts better than bar charts. I know that seems a little bit blasphemous, but it's 100% true. And it's because this domain of people stare at dials all day long. Everything's circular that they see. Michael Warling gave a presentation here at Tableau Conference. He works at Nationwide, and he talked about how executives respond really well to gauge charts. Now, I could probably list off 20 visualization books that say never use a gauge chart. But the executives he's working with, their first introduction to data was on an analog system that had gauges. So they respond well. I'm going to talk about how you can move toward best practices as you're working through this, but starting with what the user's familiar with is going to be key. The core concept here is that we're data people. We have a focus on data and technology, and we're building the products. And we're building those for people that aren't data people. They don't focus on data and technology, and we're expecting them to use our products that were built with the wrong focus. When I joined Midwest Health Collaborative, my boss said, I want you to build class of our own visualizations. First, I want you to build something. Let's just build something. We have nothing now, build something. Then he said, I want these to be best in class. And then he said, from there, I want you to take it to class of our own. So what that means for us is that these are going to be comprehensive, longitudinal patient records. So everything you need to make a decision is there. We want a coherent visualization ecosystem. You know where things go. You know what your workflow should look like. You know what to click on when. And that's partially because it maps to your workflow. When you're making the decision, the stuff is there. It's apparent. It's ready for you. And the last thing is enhancing those analytics through an interface that is intuitive. That cognitive burden of trying to stare at the screen and figure out what you're seeing goes away, and you can use that effort to make a better decision. Our answer to get to that is we design with the users. So we pair up the best of both worlds. I would like everyone in this room to remove from their sentences that they say the phrase, the users are stupid, or the users aren't smart enough, or the users can't figure this out. I don't know about everyone else here, but I work with incredibly brilliant doctors and nurses and executives. They are intelligent, but they're not familiar with my work. I'm the expert in analytics, I'm the expert in data, I'm the expert in technology. They're the experts in medicine and business and their domain areas. And when we pair those two things together, that's where the magic really starts to happen, when they're in the room designing with us. We're not designing for them, they're designing with us. So that gets us to our philosophy. We're going to use the analogy of a strand of DNA. If there are any biologists in the room, I apologize for slightly abusing a metaphor, but it is a metaphor. Let's run with it for a second. One strand here represents the process of understanding your users. You learn about your users, what their goals are, what their obstacles are, their action space, and then you also learn how they make decisions. The next part of it is the ideation phase, where you and the users together start to design concepts, start to build things together, start to figure out how you can solve some of those pain points and overcome those obstacles and accomplish those goals. And that together, just like DNA forms instructions on how our body builds cells and activates certain cells, that's what the DNA is in this metaphor. The DNA are the instructions to go build your product. We worked a lot on what our design philosophy would be because a lot of the existing philosophies, we struggled to plug them into traditional business intelligence methods. Because if there's one thing that business intelligence is already really good at, it's building stuff really, really fast, getting things out there, testing, having good deployment methodology. We wanted a design process that would keep what works, but give us better designs. And this becomes the instructions to carry on for the rest of your BI methodology. Let's go through the first part, understanding the users. We build a library of personas. We have a whole collection of example people that would be using our products. There's 3 ways to get to this. The first is social research. When we learn about a user, we find out what their role is, what their job title is, and we go on LinkedIn. We look at their profile, but we also start looking at the button that says other people also viewed. We click on that. We look at other profiles. We start to look at things like education, background, what's their career path been? Who are the teams they work with? Who are the common people in their network? We look through all of those things to try to understand our users better. We also go and look at job postings for their title. And we hear about how they talk about their job. We want to hear how their company talks about their job too. We start to understand that role. We also do artifact analysis, which is really a fancy way of saying we look through all the Excel spreadsheets they're already using. Right? That's most of the artifacts they're currently engaging with. But maybe they have other dashboards, or if they're in the medical field, it's their EHR, EMR that we can look at and understand what's the interface look like there? What are common visualizations they're already interacting with? What are common statistics they already understand? And the last part is interviews. Talking to the users, not about data, not about technology, but asking them what their job is like. What's their current workday like? I'm going to show you 2 examples of our user personas that we put together. They're super easy to do. The whole goal of a user persona is not to capture a person, and especially not a real person. It's to imagine if you had a population of users and you were to randomly sample one of those users, your persona should represent someone that's likely to be drawn from that sample. So you should find some quirks and nuances that are different from the average, but overall it should capture that idea. We want to look at things like education and career path that'll help us understand what kinds of visualizations and what kind of data they're already comfortable with. We want to look at what technologies they're working with. We also have a spot at the bottom for statistics and common visualizations so we can understand where our familiar point is, where our starting ground is. And then also that typical day. Where should we try to plug this solution into, right? One of the things that I learned coming from outside of healthcare is if I build a dashboard for a physician and I expect the physician to review performance at the end of the day, I talked to a lot of physicians that were like, I would never use that. At the end of the day, I am trying to catch up. I am trying to get messages out. I am trying to get those prescriptions signed and off, and then I'm trying to get home to my family. I'm not going to click on a dashboard outside of my workflow and try to look at and review my performance. It needs to fit somewhere else in their day. It has to fit that workflow. Another example is more on the finance side. All right, same kind of concept, same things we're looking at, but there are nuances and differences here. Once we have this basic understanding of our users, now we want to understand how they make decisions. This is a really key, important spot. We are seeing there on a whiteboard an example of something. It's an exercise we do with the users. We try to figure out what information they need to make a decision. So the first thing we want to do is define the action space. What can you do and what can't you do about your pain points and your problem? I'm not going to put anything on a dashboard that isn't helpful. Right? Maybe you find the weather very, very interesting, but it's not going to change how you work with patients. I'm not going to put it on there. I've had some really unusual asks from users that, again, when I'm asking them what they want, they say they want to look at a certain thing, but when I go through the decision map with them, we both discover together that it's not something that's going to impact how they go about their day or what decisions they make. So we pull that off of the dashboard design. You then identify the key questions that they need to answer to make a decision. And this is one of my favorite ways to do this is to ask them, what's that first piece of information you need to make? Someone has asked you to make a decision and you've got 30 seconds and you can get one question answered. What one question do you want to answer if you have to make your best call? What we're trying to do is reverse engineer that gut instinct that happens almost automatically. Think about getting dressed. Right? We make these decisions from data all the time getting dressed. We just don't think about it. It's almost instinct. But we have an idea of what the weather is because we have phones that tell us what the weather is, or we can look out our window. We use that as data. We use our agendas and who we're working with. And I came to Tableau conference. This is my first conference. I had a much different outfit than this, but I realized the culture is much more casual, so I put a t-shirt underneath the sports jacket, right? I'm adjusting to data. Now, I didn't look through and start collecting analytics on how many people there are wearing suits and ties. It was all very intuitive, but we can reverse engineer that intuition to try to make it better with analytics, and that's what this decision map is all about. Key point, do not just ask them what they want to see, or they're going to describe that Excel spreadsheet. Now we get into ideation, right? Having them participate. You're seeing whiteboards that we actually made with the users. We will, let me back up, give them a marker. Give your users a marker and encourage them to draw on the whiteboard with you. My favorite design session, I just must not have been able to interpret what this user was saying because he walked up and he grabbed a marker out of my hand and said, no, I want this. That kind of engagement from users that don't know about data and analytics, this person had no background in technology, had never worked with Tableau before. That kind of engagement is incredible. That's what we want from our users. We want them to participate in the design. This is where you can start nudging them. So they say, what about a pie chart? And you've looked at the data, and you know that it's going to end up having like 100 slices. So you draw the pie chart up on the board, and you start drawing slice after slice after slice, and right about the time your shoulder starts to get tired, you say, what about this? And you explain to them the pros and cons, right? Every chart has trade-offs. If I use this chart, I can see these things, but I can't see this. This chart, I can see these things, but I can't see this. Explaining that to the user, and they start to understand how we make decisions about what we're providing to them, and we can nudge them toward best practices and start listening to what they're looking for, and we teach them why we do what we do and what these best practices are. So you're taking what's already familiar, and you're stepping towards something a little bit new to allow them to have new insights. And then we're not going to build a dashboard and teach them Tableau right there in the moment. These physicians and these executives are certainly not going to sit down and code with us. There's no way I'm going to ask the CEO of any of those hospitals I showed you, here's Tableau, build your own dashboard, right? We step back and we wireframe. And this is where Tableau can become a really cool product, right? So we normally would wireframe in PowerPoint. I have a lot of experience doing that. But once you've got an idea of what the users are using and what style needs to be there, what color palette you're going to be using, where you're going to put your headers, et cetera, now you can have a template workbook. And so you can move even faster than having to wireframe in PowerPoint. You can just do it all right in Tableau. Make all of that move a little bit faster. You get into low-fidelity mockups, which are static. And you're basically asking them about style. You're asking them to interpret visualizations. There's this concept of heuristic evaluation and user experience and design, which is really just a fancy way of saying, I have a set number of things I want you to evaluate. How many of you have asked users what they think, and they say, OK, it's good. Or they say, I don't like the colors, and the feedback by and large is not super helpful. All right? But if you have these questions ahead of time, and if you ask them to interpret what they're seeing, that can be helpful. There are times where I build a dashboard, and I thought the answer was so obvious it was glaring. And I asked the users, again, very smart people, to interpret it, and they come up with a very different answer. They had said that they liked the dashboard, but they were misinterpreting it the entire time. So I went back. That's an on-me thing. That's a not-on-them thing. I went back, redesigned it, brought it back, and they got the answer right. Asking them to interpret what they're seeing and having prepared feedback questions ready is critical. And then you start to see some magic happen where you show them a wireframe or a dashboard in a review session, and they start saying, you know what? You had said this would be a better chart now. I'm starting to see how this all works together. Can we switch to that chart you said was best practice? That's a really cool moment, right? To have someone that in the beginning had no familiarity with a box plot, just bar plots, and they said, I just want to see bars. But then you get to that final solution, and they're saying, well, let's go back to that box plot idea. I think I'm kind of getting on board with that now. It's a really cool spot to be. That's a design process. Let's talk about what this all looks like. This is our overall analytics product roadmap / infrastructure. The first thing I want to point out are the lines at the top and the side. Critical. Everything is about the user. Where do things fit into their workflow? At the top, we have created a spectrum of users, which is clinical and finance. This is not to say that users can't fit outside of that spectrum. It is an overgeneralization, but it's helpful. It's a starting point. On the top, You can see strategy, your CXO, your VP, down to tactical. I'm not trying to construct any sort of a totem pole here to say that one person is more important than the next, but I'm thinking about the kinds of actions you're going to take from this. Mapping all of this to this spectrum of users we've been able to define has been incredibly helpful because now we know where people should log in, what kind of access they should have, what kind of data should be apparent, how granular it should be. We start with a landing page, but you see all these arrows that show how you can get from one dashboard to the next. All these arrows are designed to be very similar to that decision map, so it can carry you right through your decision-making process to that exact data point you need. It's kind of like clues. Each dashboard provides you that clue and tells you where to look next. If you've seen the movie Memento, it's all about this person leaving himself clues so he can solve a mystery. That's what we're doing here. There's a mystery of what decision should I make, and we're leaving clues with each dashboard. And each dashboard tells you what to go look at next. Our products, we're going to talk about 3 different lines here. One is the total cost of care. You see on your right, we have quality and risk, and then care management. And each of these blue boxes, actually all the boxes, are going to be separate dashboards we're building in Tableau as our enterprise platform. First, total cost of care. This is our system performance dashboard. You're going to see a fairly familiar look and feel. The use case, the common questions is how is our PMPM trending, or per member per month? What's driving the trend? And where are we wasting money? What are our areas of waste based upon evidence-based measures? If you look at the chart that's in the middle there that has, it's a waterfall chart, has a few different colors there. What we've done is said, here is your PMPM last year, and here is your PMPM this year. What's actually in the difference in those dollars? What's actually in that increase? And we've broken it down and then standardized it back into PMPM dollars. How much is due to a change in your prices? How much is due to a change in your risk? And how much is due to an actual change in utilization and volume? We found all too often that users were really trying to intuit that themselves. They were looking at a lot of these PMPM changes and being like, okay, well, I think we raised some of these prices, not these prices, and let's see, we've got our HCC scores, so we know the population got X riskier, right? And that was just really complicated. There's a lot of math going on in people's minds. That was a lot of shots in the dark and gut guesswork, and this kind of eliminates that. It makes that visualization very apparent and real. And then there are 3 boxes at the bottom, 3 panels. This is a long dashboard. We're big believers in scrollytelling, right? As you scroll down, you get more and more of that story. These 3 boxes at the bottom, or 4 boxes at the bottom, we have your setting, your episode, your chronic conditions, and your waste. And the top categories in all of those based on how much more you're spending versus last year. And we're showing that as part of a PMPM, but also overall. The cool thing about this is you can click on one chart and it will filter one of the other 4 panels. You can click on a second one and it filters the other 2, right? So you're very quickly identifying an area of opportunity, maybe just those 5 things you should go worry about, those 5 areas of waste, or maybe just these 2 chronic conditions and this episode. I can very quickly hone in and find those things I need to worry about next. The impact of that. A lot of these products are new. So it's hard to reach out to our clients and definitively say, this is an impact we've seen. But I can talk about, back to that PowerPoint slide where things were so muddy and so messy, automating this in Tableau stands to save us $86,000 a year in resource and contractor costs. And that softer ROI, executives being able to quickly identify those areas of opportunity and strategize the interventions to intervene with these things quickly. Quality and risk adjustment, something I hear over and over and over again is a hard use case. So for a background, how am I performing against quality goals against all of my contracts? If you're not really familiar with this space, the complicated part of this can come when you have multiple contracts, and each contract has different quality metrics. So you have to worry about different things for different patients, and how do I maximize my revenue across all these contracts and deliver the maximum quality to all of the patients can be a really complicated question, This visualization, you notice that it's missing a lot of labels. This is meant to be an interactive application as part of a workflow, not necessarily a visual thing that guides a story. It's an interactive application that helps you generate your workflow and your next steps. So the question of which patients should I target for outreach to address the gaps in quality and documentation? This kind of unit chart up at the top with a lot of different colors, if that square is gray, that means for that contract you met that metric. Right now, this was just a prototype on mock data that I could share. The other one has real data in it. But what you're seeing is different contracts can have different number of quality metrics you have to hit. So very quickly you can see where you're at overall, but you can hover over on each of those squares and see which quality metric it is and how far away you are from achieving that quality metric. You can look up and down and see which contract is more of a problem than other contracts where you should focus your efforts, which contract you're actually really close to, and maybe you can hit that goal and bump into the next level of revenue for that contract. Once you click on one of those squares or on one of the contracts, that bumps down to the next spot and filters everything else on the dashboard. So now I can see the quality metrics for that contract, and I can see the coding for that contract. I can then bump down even further into a practice level and a physician level and keep drilling down until I get an actionable list of patients at the bottom, an actionable list of patients that I can export that's going to show me which patients I need to reach out to because they have gaps in care or they're not up to date on their documentation. Something users can do very quickly in a workflow to figure out that exact action space. Automating this process in Tableau stands to save $12,000 per patient list. Now, obviously, we wouldn't go through all of these filters and do one for each individual physician. The hospital and the health system would take on some of that work in filtering this giant Excel spreadsheet. And that's why we moved to this dashboard where they can do it themselves, saving $12,000 per patient list, a potential of $576,000 per year. But again, that soft ROI of practice coordinators performing targeted patient outreach. The really cool part of this is the integration that we're planning on building from this, where someone can export this CSV, but that's going to pump into an automated outreach program, right? So it's text messaging or emails based upon your patient population so that you're automatically reaching out to these patients very quickly. And then this dashboard becomes measuring that progress and seeing if you need to pivot your strategy quickly because you're not responding well enough in one area. Care management. First is just showing how your care management program is performing, right? This use case, we can back up for a second. We have these patients that have conditions that are confusing. I'm a patient, I don't understand this condition. I'm having a symptom. Should I go to the ER? Should I take this medication if it's making me feel a little bit funny or I'm experiencing some symptoms, right? That's where care managers can come in and really help patients understand their condition, and it can help a health system lower that cost because patients aren't making more costly decisions. It's that coaching model that can be really powerful. The question, though, is if you're a supervisor, how is my program performing? How's my workload? That's what this dashboard is designed to provide. So we have in sort of the middle panel there, your questions about your enrollment rate, your graduation rate, how am I performing to other members of the Midwest Health Collaborative. Those median times in enrollment, we broke that down by high-risk patients and rising-risk patients. We have our own risk stratification algorithm we use for that. But that's because the distributions can be really different. And now we're looking at how many patients I have currently active. What's my workload look like? And how is that workload distributed across care managers? Do I have someone that has way too many patients or way too high of a portion of high-risk patients versus rising risk? Do I need to redistribute some of those things? And then, of course, this histogram here at the bottom showing if maybe I have any outliers. Maybe there's someone that's kind of stuck in the program and they haven't graduated. They've been in the program for 200 days. Why haven't they graduated? Why haven't they met our criteria? Do we need to adjust that criteria? Or is there some special needs with that patient we aren't quite addressing? So there's this impact, again, automating this of saving $76,000 per year, that soft ROI of being able to pivot and change what your program looks like because you're seeing that workload inefficiency, being able to treat and take care of and care manage more patients because you have information you didn't have before. Now, there's a question in the industry that I've found through building some of these things can be quite contentious, and that is, does care management even work? Right? Are we just spending money and not seeing any sort of a a real impact on patients here and not making a difference in the patients' lives or in the amount of money we're spending to keep these patients healthy? We were asked that question, and we decided to use Tableau to come to the answer. So we did some predictive and some statistical modeling in the background, and then brought those results into Tableau to bring that story to life. I want you to look at this as a story that has multiple chapters. Right now, we know there are going to be 4. We've written 2. There's probably going to be more as this story becomes more and more nuanced. The idea with statistical modeling is, there's really never one right way to approach a problem. Looking at it from multiple angles is critical. If you just look at one p-value, you're going to be wrong 1 out of every 20 times. But if we start looking at multiple kinds of tests, we start looking at different experiments and different ways of understanding this, now we can start to build a real story and really justify a certain theory or hypothesis. This is the first chapter of that story, a very simple question. For patients that enter my program and then exit my program, what is their spend like before and after? What's their rate of primary care visits before and after? What about ER visits, outpatient imaging, their prescription utilization? We have a bunch of different metrics we're looking at before enrollment and after enrollment and testing that to see if there's actually a difference. And then there's a bunch of slope charts at the bottom that show you the actual before and after numbers. So you can have an idea both of the difference in tests, but also what the before and after numbers actually were. You notice that there's a lot of text on this dashboard. It's because statistical methods can be really complicated, and our users were not familiar with advanced bootstrapping algorithms. That's one of those things that sometimes you can say to a non-technical user and the eyes just kind of glaze over. Again, it's not that they're not intelligent, they're not familiar. And so that text provides a very simple way of explaining what statistical significance means, how you're going to use this in your decisions, and what it means if something's not statistically significant. That doesn't mean there's not actually something there, we just didn't detect it. All right, so we provided some of that information to help guide that along and help them understand our methods. So now we're looking at before and after enrollment amongst care-managed patients. The next question is that even different than a control group? Right? Maybe naturally, many of my patients decreased along some of these spending metrics or along some of these utilization metrics. So now we want to ask the question, were those changes that I just saw different than control patients? A lot of the methods that we've seen match patients on chronic condition. The problem with that is that no 2 diabetes patients are the same. You can have a very different spectrum of severity and risk in diabetes patients. A more common method we've seen is chronic condition, age, and sex. But again, you can still see a lot of differences there. So we added in risk as a variable. But if they want to look at the old method too, or the more common method, they can pull risk out. So we give the user the ability to click and decide what matching criteria they want. And across those matching criteria, we compare care-managed patients before and after enrollment to a comparable group over a similar window of time. And now what we're seeing here is a difference in differences, which is something that we have to provide a little bit heavier of training on for the users. So you're not seeing it here in our earlier dashboards with fake, anonymized, randomized data, but we have a video icon we put up in the top of all of our dashboards. You click on that, and that takes you to an unlisted YouTube video. And then from there, it's going to provide some really basic education. It's under 90 seconds. Most of our videos are under 90 seconds. And that's just going to help them have a quick walkthrough and introduction of what they're seeing and what it means. If your videos go more than 90 seconds, the odds of someone watching it when they see on YouTube that it's a 15-minute long video, that goes way down. But if you keep it around that 90-second mark, they will watch it. We've seen a lot of success with that. That education helps them understand that the first visualization are 2 differences, and the second visualization is a difference of those differences. Again, keeping that blue and light blue framework for statistical significance and non-statistical significance. Automating this, $32,000 per year we saved. And then also that soft ROI of executives being able to consider whether they should expand this to more populations. Is this actually having an impact? What is the ROI of my care management population? Should I try this on new populations? The next stories of this that I want to highlight, we always get asked the question of, well, what about selection bias? Right? Patients decide to opt out of care management. Does that mean they are different from patients that opt in? Well, probably, and we recognize that. One of the consultants at Front Health actually wrote her master's thesis specifically on solving that problem using a method called propensity scoring. So our next button up there, you see in the green buttons, the next button, the next chapter of our story is going to be, can we control for those things? Can we use propensity score to control for whether a patient would opt in or opt out of our experimental treatment, right? And then, can we look at other factors and other variables? Once we can control for some things, what are the impact of other things? Maybe your program should be a little bit longer for this condition, but a little bit shorter for that condition, right? What levers can we test out pulling to see if it makes a difference? Then that final story, obviously we need more data to capture this, but is this difference long-lasting, or do they return to a baseline? Is this a longitudinal impact we're making in patients' lives, or do we expect it to return to a baseline? And if it does, when should we intervene again? So we'll have a longitudinal button as well. The results, right? Let's talk about the key lessons again, kind of a recap. We went from manual, static deliverables to dynamic Tableau dashboards for on-demand automated insights, right? Remember that slide I showed that was that convoluted web? It's now much simpler. And that's not just for our end users that have one place to go. That's also for us that are having to do the analytics and the consulting. It's much more streamlined. We found that developing products that are competitive and will eventually stand as a class of their own requires more than just reading a lot of the best practices books and following those best practices. It requires an understanding of our users and how they make decisions, and then inviting them into that design process and welcoming them to have a say in what it is they're going to be using. The measurable benefits. MHC was able to be part of initiatives that helped decrease our PMPM spend trend from 5% down to 2%. That was with static deliverables. As I mentioned, our products are new, so it's hard to gather that PMPM trend as a result of using Tableau, but take a moment and imagine if our static deliverables were delivered once a quarter because it's such a manual process, and we were able to be part of this, what would it look like if you could get this information whenever you wanted it, and it was updated even faster? You could move and react even faster than what we're currently enabling them to do and seeing such success with. Automating this, all those numbers I showed you totaled up to about $886,000 per year in savings due to automation. That number is going to keep going up because we're building new products. It's just going to keep going up. My boss loves this number, and the more that number goes up, the happier my boss gets, right? We build these new products, and we keep automating things and saving more and more money because we're just able to do more. Our consultants now don't have that convoluted web they have to work through. They have more time. We've also generated demand, right? Sometimes it can be hard to have that political capital to go talk to the end users. So you get a little bit of buy-in here, a little bit of buy-in there, and then you get to talk to more users, and your products become better representatives and better use cases for even more users, right? Small successes generate future successes, and we're starting to see that. And then my favorite metric as a designer is I literally had a user dance when she interacted with the dashboard for the first time. She got out of her chair and did a little happy dance, and that made me it was so incredibly heartwarming as a designer to see someone respond to something built in Tableau that way. It's a really powerful moment. The question is, if we're here now, where do we go next? The first thing is we have new products to build. Our users want new things. They're excited about what we have, but they have more decisions they have to make, and so we're trying to enable those with things like physician scorecards, things like pharmacy spend dashboards, your specific condition, quality, and spend dashboards, and then, of course, bundle performance is something we're hearing a lot about. This kind of goes back to that product architecture I showed you. It's always dynamic and always living, but it's always mapped to our user personas. We're also going to start looking at predictive analytics. Right now, you saw a lot of what should you do based on what happened last year and this year. Well, maybe we can get ahead of that curve a little bit, and you can start intervening in areas before they become a problem. So we're evaluating a lot of different methods to go about that and plug that into, especially starting out our total cost of care area. And then finally, in 2019, we plan to go full embedded so we can really map these things to the user's workflows and get that really streamlined navigation using Tableau as the driver of the analytics. We'll have our own custom website and put those dashboards there so our users know where to go when for what answer. It's all built in there and ready to go for them, and Tableau is the engine that will drive that. I want to thank everybody for your time. I hope my passion came through at just the right level, because I get so excited about using design principles and using analytics and Tableau and both sides of my brain on something that I care about and something that I believe can really make an impact and make a difference. I would love to connect with anyone, so there is my email, my LinkedIn. I'm also active on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions. I did forget to plug the slide in there that asks you to fill out your evaluation, so please do that for me. And I'd like to open it up for any questions.
If you have questions, just raise your hands and I'll come with the mic.
I keep seeing cell phones pop up and thinking it's a question.
So I think that's actually my favorite presentation I've seen. It's
thank you.
Terrific work.
Thank you.
Do you ever say no, like a hard stop on a visualization that someone requests, like bubble charts, for instance, where they want 50 different bubbles? Because that's something we run into ourselves.
Do I ever say no, like a hard no to a user? I've never had to, being completely honest. I've heard them ask for, again, not assuming that users are stupid, but they're not familiar with what we're looking for in best practices. So I've heard some questions and asks that sound absolutely ridiculous to me as someone that does this all the time. So I return to that conversation of understanding, and usually I find what pain point they're trying to solve with that. And then I can work back and I can show them different examples. Sometimes they will build what they ask for, and then I build what I think would work better, and I show them the two, and boy, they always want to choose the one that delivers the better insights.
Thank you, Josh, for the great presentation. I just have a quick question about your pre and post
yes.
analysis, and also the mass one. We do that every quarter and all that stuff. Do you put specific pre-enrollment criteria, like member has to be with you for 6 months or 12 months? I mean, it's not hard facts, but you have to decide. So how you do it, because your data seems a little bit different than ours. Well, we work in insurance companies, so we have eligibility data. Mm-hmm. How you do that, how you adjust for this?
Yeah, that's going to open up a whole can of worms around a really complicated method. And I'd love to talk that through further. There are windows. We do have a window where someone has to have been a patient prior for a certain amount of time, and then a patient post a certain amount of time. And that's just simply so we can capture a lot of that data. Those windows and this matching criteria was developed based on two principles. One was analyzing and understanding the data. But two was understanding the data generating process. So before we even got to the data, we worked with our chief medical officer, and I worked with our biostatistician, and we modeled out what generates what causes what are the confounding variables, what are the mediating variables. We drew it out on a whiteboard, and then figured out how we could control for things as best as possible. So those two things together informed our methods. Yeah, good question.
Hi. My name is Megan. I'm with the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and I work in quality improvement. And my job is to get data and motivate people to make a change as a result. And with the population health data visualizations that you're making, has there been any particular factor that has gotten people really excited to say, hey, whoa, we need to address this, or I'm excited to work harder on this?
Yeah, I want to answer that with a couple of different twists there. So one is a lot of times seeing the data can really make it obvious if we start connecting that to the problems that they're facing, right? Go back to that understanding and their pain points and show this relates back to that obstacle that you were telling me you face. This is what's making your job difficult. That can be a helpful spot. The other thing is, I mentioned these products align with our strategic consulting initiative. So we have brilliant consultants, and they are really good at getting people energized. And so the woman that we have that's in charge of really this area is absolutely wonderful at going to a system and explaining to them how this is going to end up with certain results that they're wanting for. And so helping to connect that bridge between data and the end results they're looking for. So I think it's a combination of seeing the data and connecting it back to that understanding principle.
Thank you. I work for InterSystems, and would you be able to talk about challenges of accessing the data, or extracting the data from the healthcare
Yes.
systems?
Yes. So it was for quite some time a very, very manual process. There were interfaces online that you picked which variables you wanted and had to pull it down. And if you needed a different kind of query, that was a separate window on your tab. And I happened to walk up to our data engineer that was testing something one time and saw 20 different tabs in his browser, which, I don't know about you, but that gives me like a spike in blood pressure, 20 different tabs. What we've done is really pushed the back end of that thing with our server. So our server is loaded with Python and sometimes R if we're running more advanced analytics. We choose to use R for that. We connect to one system that's SQL Server running through Python. We actually pass some SQL that way. Then we have another system we connect through an API. Did that answer your question?
How many systems did you have to work with?
Oh, good question. So we are working with 2 aggregators. So the question was, in case you didn't hear it, how many systems do we have to work with? We're working with 2 aggregators already that are doing all of the work for us to integrate information from all the different claims and all the different third-party administrators. And so we're just working with 2 systems. Yeah.
Hi, I'm James from the University of Texas Health Science Center. And this is just weird. Your dashboard there, I appreciate the fact that you can filter on each one of the tabs, but then you also display patient data in the dashboard. Is there, and I'd like to know from the audience, do you guys have an issue with providing detailed data in the dashboard, patient data? Because that's a big deal at our institution.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to address how we work with that. We don't see it here, but we started an internal data ethics committee to ask questions exactly like what you're asking. Bridget Cogley gave an incredible presentation yesterday on the importance of data ethics. And so thinking about the security, but also that next level around the ethics of security, not just being compliant, but are we doing the right thing? And our chief medical officer told us something that was part of his history that was really valuable, which is kind of a break the glass idea. So if you want to see PHI, there is a button to push to see PHI. Otherwise, all of that is hidden. And we're just using numbers that then they could type into an EHR and EMR. That prevents, let's say one of our care managers, right, is wanting to check that scorecard while she is at a cafe. Well, that prevents her from accidentally showing something that someone over her shoulder could see, but it also enables them to stay within that workflow because we found that they use that information to very quickly reach out to patients. So it's a good point. We're constantly evaluating those on our data ethics committee, and we're starting to move toward this concept of break the glass, where there is a button so you have to choose to see PHI. Good question. I'm gonna wait for a, oop.
Yeah, so I work for a data aggregator that works on multiple state level projects. And so we're dealing with customers from 30 to 300 different organizations with, 300 plus users. So when you are getting user feedback, how many users do you reach out to before, I guess, widely disseminating to a larger user population?
Great question. We work with a few core beta users. It's people that understand that software development is a process and that these things are living and dynamic, and if there's like a little bug, they're not going to flip out and assume your product's no good. They're going to be helpful in that process. But there's also, if you look in the corner, a feedback button. Super simple survey. It just goes to Google Surveys, and it has 3 questions. The first one is, what do you think? The second one is, what would make it better? And the third one is, can we reach out to you? And that's where we would bring them in and ask them more questions or give them a call. So there's the ability for everyone to give us feedback, but we have a core set of beta users that are our go-to people. Yes, next question.
Hi. In what ways does your product address the socioeconomic drivers for population health?
Good question. That is something that's definitely on the radar. It's not in our product architecture now because we're still evaluating where to put in those social determinants of health. But we are actively evaluating that and starting to look into ways we could plug that in, and especially in care management and this pop health engine. Thinking about the outreach, right, and segmenting different patients, what's the best way to reach out to them? And are we going to be reaching out to patients that may not have some of the tools and technology that we would expect them to have during outreach? So it's a great question. It's being evaluated to see where it fits in that product architecture. Great question. Yes?
Expanding on your PHI, Do you have security built into your platforms that, depending on who the user is, they can or cannot see PHI, and only maybe specific PHI based on who they are?
Absolutely, 100%. So we have levels and levels and levels of encryption. And in fact, we had to go through multiple rounds of testing because we found we were over-encrypting a lot of things, and even Tableau itself couldn't access it. But beyond that, all of our access goes through that security portal, Okta, with the multi-factor authentication. But then even a lot of the users that have that access to our suite of products still can't get to the dashboards that have PHI in it. We have denied access to all of the raw data sources as a first level of safety. But then beyond that, we give people access that have a really good use case for access. And we've had some conversations around, will you actually use this information in your job? And if you won't, then we're going to withhold that to protect you, to protect the patients. We've had some difficult conversations around that, but there is a very strict limit on who can access this, and they have to have a good use case. Good question.
Great. Thank you again for a great presentation. Going back to one of your earlier slides where you kind of showed the evolution from where you started, where you had the Excel and the PowerPoints and all the users, to where you are now, from a time and a resource perspective, how long did it take to get from point A to point B, and what kind of resources did you have at your fingertips for that?
All right, here are the slides you're referencing, correct? So it was a bit of an unwieldy process because when I started, we had 2 Tableau Creator desktop. Creator wasn't even out. 2 Tableau desktop licenses, and this was back in December of last year. So we had to evaluate our cloud platform that we're using. We had to evaluate our encryption platforms. We had to evaluate, obviously, the portals that we could use. The Tableau part was easy. I walked in and they said, what should we use for data viz? And I said, Tableau fits this use case. That was the only easy part of the evaluation. But then became a lot of the discussions around contracting and negotiation to make sure we were in line with all of our BAAs and HIPAA, our business associate agreements. And so by the time we got a lot of that set up and built our security and infrastructure, right, that timeline was I started in December and worked with our VP of Analytics and Technology to get to where we are now. So just since December of last year.
You referenced tough conversations about who should have access to PHI. Who are you having those conversations with? Whose purview is that in your system? And do you have separate security for different patient groups like those with HIV or behavioral health issues or across different hospital centers?
Good question. So first was, who are we having those tough conversations with? Sometimes those are with users that say, I want to see this. And the nice thing is establishing a point of contact at each of these systems. That's that kind of final say of, yes, this person can have access, or no, this person can't. And sometimes we'll have to gather information and bring it to that point of contact. But ultimately, we might have to have a hard conversation to explain why we're saying no, but then go back to that point of contact to make sure we can get a level of approval. So our Chief Information Security Officer is a big part of that process and helping us understand and think through and communicate with our members and clients who can and can't have access to this. And then you were talking about, if I understood correctly, access across different settings and lines of business. Right now, these all kind of fit in an overarching health system perspective. So there's no one that's at a level that would only worry about one setting or one line of business. I would imagine as it evolves, we certainly have to revisit that, and we certainly have to rethink how we're doing some of the automated user filtering to make sure that they're only seeing what's pertinent to them. Yeah.
So in regards to population health, one of the areas that we focus on is utilization, and seeing that some of our attributed members are being overutilized by outside external specialists. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys manage that on your end?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. So the external utilization has a lot to do with looking at who's referring who, where, and when. We've had a lot of conversations about reference, and this Pop Health engine and the woman that is in charge of that, her name's Taylor. I'm going to start referring to her as Taylor instead of just the woman. She has a lot of work and a lot of experience in helping hospitals understand referrals and helping them understand where you have patients coming into your network and where you have patients that are leaking out of your network. Looking at analytics that fully explore that is another thing that's on the roadmap. of understanding where patients are being referred out or into your system. Did that answer your question okay? Great. Last question.
Claims data can be very messy, and I was just curious, do you, have you been able to go back, or do you have requirements for your, for the plans you go to as far as required fields, or have you been able to go to them, because analytics is only as good as the data that you actually have going there. So if you found good adoption as far as being able to get more codes coming through or more information and better information from your provider groups?
Yeah, so the one advantage in being completely upfront and honest is that aggregator helps a lot of that for us. And so the aggregator is contracted with our members as well. And so a lot of that pre-work is something that is done for us. Data still doesn't always come in perfect. So there's a lot of other effort. What we found to be really successful is combining the clinical and claims data and setting up very careful algorithms to say, if we're missing this here, what are sets of rules we can use to look at the other side of our picture and see if we can fill in a blank. Obviously being careful and making sure that we're not over-inferring or extrapolating from a data source that we have no business from, but being careful to try to map those things up. And so on our back end and on our data server, we're running a lot of processes to try to generate a consistent story across both of those data sources and make sure they match up in a way that's useful to the user. It does end up coming back to what's the user looking for? Is this information pertinent from a claims perspective or from a clinical perspective? How are they thinking about it? How are they using it? And then figuring out how we can line that up on our back end to pump it into Tableau. I think that was the last question. So thank you all for being here. You were a great audience. I enjoyed it today.